I used to believe in love stories, the kind where two people meet, fall in love, and spend their lives building something unbreakable. That's what I thought I had with Elena. She was perfect in every way, graceful, intelligent, with a presence that could silence a room. The kind of woman who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. When she smiled, the world seemed to slow down just for her. And I was the man who had won her heart. Or so I thought. Our life was the picture of stability. A modern house in a quiet neighborhood. Weekend trips to the mountains. Dinners at our favorite little restaurant where the owner knew our usual order. We never fought, never had major problems. If there were cracks in our marriage, I never saw them. Maybe because I wasn't looking. I worked long hours running my own business, and Elena, as an independent consultant, had a flexible schedule. She often worked from home, sometimes traveled for meetings. It never bothered me. If anything, I admired her ambition. Then small things started to feel off. Not enough to raise alarm, just a shift in the air. A text message at dinner that made her face go unreadable for a second too long. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering on her coat when she got home late. A locked drawer in her study that was never locked before. I ignored it, dismissed it. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was stress or paranoia, or just life pulling us slightly apart the way it sometimes does in long relationships. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a random Tuesday. I was going over our bank statements, something I rarely did in detail, when I noticed a transaction. A luxury hotel. Not in the city but an hour away. Booked under her name. For a single night. I stared at it for a long time, my mind scrambling for a logical explanation. A work meeting? A spa day? A friend in need? I could have asked her. I should have. But something inside me told me not to. Instead, I decided to wait. To watch. To listen. Because if there was one thing I knew about Elena, it was that she was careful. Calculated. She never made mistakes. And yet, here it was. The first crack. I just had to see how deep it went. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to Elena, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every interaction from the past few months. Every business trip. Every late night. Every moment she hesitated before answering a simple question. She slept peacefully beside me, her breathing slow and steady, as if nothing was wrong, as if she wasn't hiding something. The next morning, I acted normal. I kissed her goodbye, told her I'd be working late. She smiled, the same warm, effortless smile I had seen 1,000 times. But now it felt rehearsed. As soon as she left, I started digging. First, her phone. Locked. Nothing surprising. She had always been cautious with privacy. Her laptop, also locked. Then I remembered the drawer in her study, the one that had never been locked before. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the small, silver lock. It wasn't high security. A simple pin could probably pick it. But I wasn't ready for that step. Not yet. Instead, I went to our shared laptop, the one she rarely used but occasionally logged into. I checked the browser history. Nothing unusual. Bank accounts. Nothing glaring. But then, in the email's trash folder, I found something. An e-ticket. A flight booked 2 months ago. A return ticket for a weekend trip. Except I hadn't gone anywhere that weekend. The destination was a city neither of us had reason to visit. There was no work conference, no family, no old friends we talked about reconnecting with. Just a single, unexplained trip. My heartbeat drummed in my ears as I stared at the screen. I needed more. That night, I casually asked her how her day was. She responded as always, detailing a few meetings, a new client she was considering. I listened, nodded, pretended to be distracted with my phone. Then I threw in the bait. By the way, I might have a business trip next month. The same weekend you had that spa retreat last time. Thinking of booking the same place. Was it worth it? Her fork paused for the briefest second before she smiled. Oh, I actually didn't end up going. Work got too busy. Lies. She continued eating, unaware that the ground beneath her was already cracking. I told myself I wouldn't act impulsively. I would gather proof. I would be smart about it. But something inside me had already shifted. She thought she was careful. She had no idea who she was up against. I had two options. Confront Elena and let her spin a story I wasn't ready to hear, or play along and gather enough proof to leave no room for doubt. I chose the second. I started with the basics, patterns. When did she leave? When did she return? Who did she call? I paid attention to the way she dressed when she worked from home. Some days she barely got out of pajamas. Other days, she put on perfume and styled her hair as if she had somewhere important to be. But she never left the house. At least not while I was watching. So I got creative. One morning, after she left for a client meeting, I placed a small strip of clear tape over the edge of the front door, pressed it down carefully, and left for work. When I came home, the tape was still there. She hadn't left all day. Another lie. I started checking our car's mileage. Some days it barely moved. Other days, she'd drive an extra 100 kilometers for what was supposedly a quick errand. Then there was the trash, something I never would have considered before. A crumpled-up receipt from an expensive bar I'd never heard of. A matchbook from a hotel. A business card for a tailor specializing in men's suits. The final piece came from something unexpected, our shared credit card statement. It was subtle, but the purchases told a story. She had bought 2 expensive watches within the past 6 months. I had received one as a surprise gift for our anniversary. The other, it never made it home. She had 2 lives, and I was about to step into the one she thought was invisible. I knew where she'd be that evening. A last-minute dinner with an old colleague at an upscale restaurant downtown. I arrived 20 minutes before her reservation, dressed in a simple black coat, blending into the background. She walked in exactly on time, wearing a dress I had never seen before. Her phone was in her hand, her fingers tapping out a message. A minute later, another man arrived. Tall, well-dressed, confident. He kissed her cheek as he took his seat. Not a friend, not a colleague. I had seen enough. I walked out without a word. My chest was tight, my hands curled into fists, but I felt no rage. Not yet. I was beyond that now. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. This was going to be something else. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't argue. I didn't confront her. Instead, I lay awake beside her, feeling the warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her breath, and the weight of the knowledge I now carried. She wasn't having an affair. She was living an entirely separate life. The next morning, I worked as usual, went through emails, took my calls, played the part of a man too busy to notice the cracks in his own home. But in the background, I was assembling a different puzzle. One man wasn't enough. Not for her. That much became clear when I started digging deeper. The man from the restaurant, his name was Daniel. A corporate lawyer. Married with 2 kids. His firm's website had his face plastered all over it. Smiling, confident. The image of a devoted family man. Then there was another name. A second hotel booking. Different location, different date, different man. A private investigator might have been the smart choice, but I didn't want a report with cold facts. I wanted to see it for myself. And I did. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as Elena moved seamlessly between her 2 worlds. Some nights, she was the perfect wife. Dinners at home, affectionate glances, a casual "I love you" before bed. Other nights, she disappeared, slipping into high-end bars and boutique hotels, always meeting a different man, always playing a slightly different version of herself. I followed. I watched. I listened. There was no guilt in her actions.
No hesitation.
No second thoughts. She was precise, methodical. Each man played a role, served a purpose. Daniel, the corporate lawyer, was stability. He paid for expensive gifts, whisked her away to hotels that cost more per night than some people made in a month. Then there was the other one, Alex. Younger, athletic, rough around the edges. A photographer, judging by the expensive camera bag he always carried. With him, she was playful, wild, unrestrained in a way she never was with me. And then the third. Not a businessman. Not a thrill-seeker. A psychiatrist. I overheard just enough in a dimly lit cafe to understand what she got from him. He listened. He understood her. He made her feel seen. I wasn't angry anymore. I was fascinated. My wife wasn't cheating. She was collecting. Each man fulfilled a different need, and each one believed he was the one. The realization didn't break me. It didn't send me into a rage. It made me smile, because now I knew exactly how to dismantle her world. Not with screaming, not with violence, with something far worse. Elena had built a house of mirrors, and I was about to shatter every single one. Elena thought she was playing a game. She thought she had control. She was wrong. I spent the next week studying her. Not just her actions, but her methods. How she switched between different versions of herself so effortlessly. How she adjusted her tone, her body language, even her interests depending on the man she was with. To Daniel, the lawyer, she was elegant and composed. She spoke about business, politics, high society. She laughed softly, never too loud, never too crass. She let him believe he was in charge, even when she was the one pulling the strings. To Alex, the photographer, she was reckless, impulsive. She wore leather jackets instead of designer coats. She talked about art, about breaking the rules, about freedom. She made him believe he was the only person who truly understood her. And to the psychiatrist Matthew, she was vulnerable. She told him about her struggles, about feeling lost, about needing someone who truly sees her. She let him believe he was saving her. Each man was a carefully crafted illusion. She didn't just cheat. She designed her betrayals. But here's the thing about people who think they're in control. They never see the trap coming. I started small. A misplaced text. One night, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone and copied a single text message she had sent to Alex. Something flirty. Something innocent. Then I sent it to Daniel. Just a simple mistake, right? A misdirected message. She covered for it, of course. She always did. But now Daniel had a seed of doubt. Then, the next day, I left one of Daniel's expensive gifts, an engraved bracelet, on the passenger seat of Alex's car.
Un simple accident.
Except now Alex had questions. The cracks in her perfect world were forming. The final touch. I scheduled a session with Dr. Matthew. Not as myself, of course. I used a different name, a fake profile. Told him I was struggling with trust, with deception, with a partner who was playing a dangerous game. And as he listened, so professional, so thoughtful, I watched his face carefully. Because deep down he already knew. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he had already suspected. I was just giving him the final push. By the time I left his office, I knew the end had already begun. Elena had built a life where she held all the power. But she had forgotten the most important rule of any game. The moment someone else learns the rules, they can beat you at your own game. Elena had spent years perfecting her craft. The way she controlled narratives, kept her secrets airtight, and managed each man like pieces on a chessboard. But no one is invincible. And now she was slipping. The first sign came with Daniel. He called her during dinner. I saw the name flash on her phone before she flipped it over, her fingers tightening around the fork. She let it ring out. Then, seconds later, a text. We need to talk. Now. Her mask was flawless, but I knew her too well. There was tension in her shoulders, a stiffness in her movements. I didn't say a word, just watched. She excused herself, went to the kitchen, and I followed. Not too close, just enough to hear. Her voice was calm, controlled. Daniel, I'm at home. I can't talk right now. Then silence. His voice was loud enough that I could hear the anger spilling through the speaker. He wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding answers. Then the words that sent a jolt through me. Who the hell is Alex?
Elena froze.
Just for a second. Then she recovered. What are you talking about? I could hear him pacing on the other end. Don't play dumb, Elena. I know about the bracelet. I know it wasn't for me. A long silence. Then, her voice, soft, measured. You're being paranoid. We should talk in person. She was good. Even cornered, she knew how to control the situation. But she had no idea what was coming next. Because while she was handling Daniel, I was already pulling the next thread. Earlier that day, I had done something reckless. Something dangerous. I had followed her to one of her meetings with Alex. Watched as she laughed. touched his hand across the table, whispered things I couldn't hear but already knew. And when they parted ways, I followed Alex. Waited for the right moment. Then, when he stepped away from his car to grab something from a cafe, I slipped a single photograph under his windshield wiper. Picture of Elena, with Daniel, holding hands. A simple move, a brutal one. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I already knew how this would play out. The next morning, while Elena was in the shower, I saw the message from Alex pop up on her phone. Who the hell is Daniel? I smiled. The fire had been lit, and now I was going to watch her entire world burn. Elena had built a house of cards, and now, one by one, they were collapsing. The moment she saw Alex's message, I watched her face closely. Her breath hitched. Her fingers hovered over the screen, frozen in indecision. For the first time in years, I saw something in her expression that I had never seen before. Panic. She quickly typed a response, then deleted it, then typed again. I pretended not to notice, sipping my coffee, scrolling through my phone as if nothing had changed. But I felt it in the air, the shift. She was losing control, and I was just getting started. 2 days later, Daniel vanished. Not literally, of course, but to Elena it must have felt that way. His calls stopped. His texts went unanswered. His usual good morning messages disappeared. She called him, twice, 3 times. No response. I knew why. Because the night before, Daniel had received an anonymous email. Attached were photos of Elena with Alex, taken from a distance, candid, unmistakable. The email had no explanation. No threats. Just the cold, undeniable truth. He had seen enough. That night, Elena barely touched her food. She kept checking her phone, her mind elsewhere. I let her stew in it, let the paranoia grow. Then, just when she thought she might be able to salvage something, I pulled the next thread. Elena had always been careful. She never mixed her lives, never let one man bleed into the world of another. Until now. The next morning, Alex showed up at her usual cafe. She wasn't expecting him, but I was. I sat 2 tables away, hidden behind a newspaper, watching. He didn't sit down, didn't smile. Instead, he pulled out his phone, showed her the picture. The one of her with Daniel. Her expression didn't just change. It shattered. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. Alex wasn't a fool. He had been played, and now he knew it. And from the way he stood abruptly, from the sharp turn of his body as he stormed out, I knew he wouldn't be coming back. One more card down. Elena sat there for a long time, unmoving, her hands clenched into fists. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control. And she had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. This was only the beginning. Now it was time to make her afraid. Elena didn't break easily. She wasn't the kind of woman to collapse the moment things went wrong. No. She was a strategist, always planning 3 moves ahead. But what happens when the board is flipped, and she doesn't even know who her opponent is? That's when the real game begins. Started small. A note, left on the dashboard of her car. How many more are there? No name. No explanation. Just those 6 words. She read it while sitting in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled. Then, a second note, slipped under the front door. You thought you could keep them all hidden? I watched from across the street as she stepped outside, glancing around nervously, scanning for a threat she couldn't see. She didn't know if it was Daniel, or Alex, or someone else entirely. She was unraveling. Daniel was gone. Alex had cut contact. But the final piece was the psychiatrist, Matthew. He had been her safe place, the one who understood her. But not anymore, because 2 nights later, he received a package at his office. Inside was a printed conversation between Elena and Alex. Flirty, personal, explicit enough that no explanation could erase what it meant. The final nail? A single line at the bottom. You were never the only one. Elena didn't know it yet, but she had just lost her last lifeline. I watched from the shadows as she called him, again, and again, and when he finally answered, I saw the moment her world collapsed. because his voice was cold, detached. He had seen the truth, and now he wanted nothing to do with her. By the time she came home that night, her usual confidence was gone. She paced the living room, phone in hand, checking messages that wouldn't come. Then, for the first time in years, she came to me. "Leon," she said softly, standing in the doorway. Something's wrong." I looked up, feigning concern. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. I think someone is watching me." I set down my book. "Why would someone do that?" She swallowed. "I don't know." Lies. She did know. She just didn't know who. And that was the worst part. Not knowing where the attack was coming from. Not knowing how much damage had already been done. Not knowing that the man sitting across from her, the one she had so easily deceived for years, was the one dismantling her life piece by piece. I let out a breath, leaned back in my chair. "Don't worry, Elena," I said with a small smile. "I'll take care of everything." She let out a shaky breath, nodding. "Thank you." And in that moment I knew she had never been more afraid in her life. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Elena had always been surrounded by admirers. Men who adored her. Men who needed her. Now, for the first time, she was alone. And she was terrified. The next morning, she woke up to more silence. No messages. No calls. She checked her phone obsessively, scrolling through old conversations, rereading messages like they could somehow bring back what she had lost. I watched her closely, careful not to give anything away. She tried calling Daniel. Straight to voicemail. Alex blocked her number. Matthew left her last message on read. Her carefully built world was crumbling, and she had no idea who was responsible. I started feeding her fear one whisper at a time. At night I made sure she heard things. A knock on the window, a creak on the stairs, the subtle sound of footsteps outside. Nothing obvious, just enough to make her question reality. She barely slept. Every night she checked the locks twice, 3 times, peered through the blinds, listened for sounds that weren't there. The next day, I left another note, this time inside the house. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" She found it in the kitchen drawer. Her hands trembled when she picked it up. Then, something I didn't expect, she turned to me. "Leon," she said, voice low, strained. "I need to tell you something." I looked up from my laptop, playing the role of the concerned husband perfectly. "What's wrong?" She hesitated. For a moment I thought she might confess. Tell me the truth. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because the moment she admitted it, everything would fall apart. Instead, she just shook her head. "I think someone is following me." I frowned. "What makes you say that?" She hesitated again. Never mind. I just need to be careful." Careful. She was still trying to fix this. Still hoping she could regain control. She had no idea that it was already over. That night she tried one last desperate move. She left. I watched from the window as she drove off, hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't going to a friend. She had none. She wasn't going to the police. Not yet. She was going to Matthew, her last remaining thread. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Matthew had already made his decision. And I had made sure of it. Because earlier that day he had received another package. This time it wasn't just a letter. It was a USB drive. A collection of conversations. Voice recordings. Proof that Elena had never loved him. Had never been honest with him. That to her he was just another piece in the game. And when she arrived at his house, desperate for comfort, for understanding, he didn't answer the door. She knocked again. Harder. Nothing. She tried calling. Straight to voicemail. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw something I never thought I'd see. Elena standing in the middle of the street, alone, lost, completely and utterly powerless. The game was over, and she had lost. But I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Elena came home late that night, shoulders hunched, face pale. She didn't say a word as she walked past me, heading straight to the bedroom. She was breaking. Good. I let her sit in silence for an hour before I made my next move. A soft knock on the bedroom door.
Elena.
She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, yeah. I stepped inside, acting hesitant, as if I was worried about her. You've been quiet. Is everything okay? She hesitated. I could see the war in her eyes, whether to confide in me or keep trying to control the damage. Then, she did something surprising. She broke down. I don't know what's happening, Leon, she whispered, hands gripping her head. I think someone is messing with me. I frowned. Messing with you how? She let out a shaky breath. Daniel's gone. Alex too. Matthew won't even look at me. And now these messages, these notes. I think someone is watching me. I sat down beside her, careful, calculated. Have you told the police? She shook her head quickly.
No.
No, I can't. Why not? Another hesitation. Then a quiet, broken admission. Because I don't know what they know. I almost smiled. Almost. Instead, I placed a reassuring hand on hers. I won't let anything happen to you, Elena. I promise. She nodded, swallowing hard, but I could see it now. She wasn't just afraid of who was behind this. She was afraid of what they were capable of. And she was right to be, because I wasn't done yet. The next day, I left her one last message. A single envelope, left on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. Inside was a single Polaroid picture of her, taken the night before, standing outside Matthew's house, alone. Her expression when she found it was priceless. She stumbled backward, knocking over a glass, her hands shaking. Then, she spun around, eyes wild, scanning the empty house. Who are you? She screamed into the silence. I watched from the hallway, unseen, waiting for the moment it sank in. She was trapped, nowhere to run, no one to trust, and she had no idea that the person she was most afraid of was the one sitting across from her at dinner every night. I had taken everything from her, and now it was time to show her who had been in control all along. Elena locked every door, checked every window. She paced the house, phone clutched in her trembling hand, debating whether to call the police. But she didn't, because she wasn't just scared of who was doing this. She was scared of what they knew. I played my part perfectly, sat on the couch pretending to be confused, concerned. Elena, what's wrong? She hesitated, studied me. Then, finally, I think someone's been following me. I frowned. Do you want me to stay home tomorrow? We can figure this out together. Her lips parted. Relief flickered in her eyes. She wanted to say yes, but she didn't trust anyone anymore. Not even me. She was completely alone, and she didn't even realize that was the point.
Elena Barelai slipped.
Every creak in the house made her flinch. Every shadow felt like a threat. I made sure of it. A single chair, slightly moved in the living room. A cabinet door left open that she knew she had closed. Her own handwriting, copied perfectly, scrawled on a note beside her pillow. You can't escape this. She woke up gasping. I pretended not to notice. Over breakfast, her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup. She glanced at me, as if searching for reassurance. But I just smiled, because she had never looked more afraid in her life. Elena couldn't take it anymore. That evening, she packed a bag. I watched as she rushed around the bedroom, stuffing clothes inside, hands shaking too much to zip it up properly. She turned to me, breathless. I need to go somewhere safe. I tilted my head. Safe from who? She hesitated. She didn't know. She only knew that someone had destroyed her life. And then, I leaned forward, voice calm, steady. What if you've been looking at the wrong people this whole time? The color drained from her face. And I saw it. The moment she realized. The moment it clicked. She stared at me, lips parting, her entire world shattering in real time. Leon, she whispered. I just smiled. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Elena stumbled backward, her breath ragged. It was you? I stood slowly, watching the horror spread across her face. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't see? She shook her head, eyes darting around, looking for an escape. But there was none. You ruined everything, she whispered. I stepped closer.
No, Elena.
You did. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from guilt, from fear. For the first time, she knew what it felt like to be powerless. You took everything from me, she choked. I leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. Now you know how it feels. Elena bolted for the door. I didn't stop her. She yanked it open, expecting freedom, only to freeze. Outside, the world was dark. Empty. No one left to run to. Daniel was gone. Alex had abandoned her. Matthew wanted nothing to do with her. She turned back to me, realization dawning. There's nowhere left for you, Elena. Her breath hitched. I stepped forward, slow, controlled. All those men, you collected them like trophies. Pieces in your little game. Her back hit the wall. And now, I whispered, you're just another piece in mine. She opened her mouth. To scream, to beg. I didn't care. I shut the door, locked it, and for the first time, Elena truly understood. She wasn't in control anymore. She never had been.